AI, it's everywhere. It's a topic on everyone's lips. W&A have been recruiting into the accountancy and finance markets for more than 20 years, and it's hard to recall a theme that has created so much debate. In recruitment, we need to be at the forefront of both talent and skills, and it's safe to say that AI is undoubtedly beginning to shape the future of both. So is the hype real? Is the advancement of AI in the workplace as rapid as some predicted? What does the accountant of tomorrow's remit look like, and what could you be doing to future-proof your skills? In W&Ai, we hear from industry leaders and experts about the opportunities and risks that AI present, and importantly, what are the finance use cases and pitfalls. I'm Ross, we're W&A, and this is W&Ai. In today's episode, I'm delighted to be joined by Sean Robertson. Sean is Head of AI and Data at ICAS, and also Jaci Badenhorst, who is Finance AI Lead and Product Owner at NatWest Group in Edinburgh. Gentlemen, thanks a lot for joining us. Really appreciate your time. Jaci, you and I have known one another several years.
Yeah, I think it's 11 years this year.
11 years this year, yeah, long time. And Sean, we've only just getting to know one another, but thank you so much for your time. AI as a topic and as a concept is everywhere, and in the accountancy and finance markets where I've been recruiting for 20 years, I've never quite known a topic that's divided opinion, that perhaps creates so much opportunity and probably equal parts risk as well as opportunity. And the purpose of these conversations is really going to shape thinking around what companies should be doing in terms of a starting point, implementation, policy, governance, usage, all the way through to some really interesting case studies and usage, and the nature of the experience that you both have, I thought could really add value to this first conversation. So yeah, thanks again. I'm delighted to have you both. It'd be really helpful for the audience if you wouldn't mind giving just a bit of insight into your background and career journey, just as a starting point. Sean?
Yeah, so I've been trying to make sense of data and try to drive good experiences from data for over 30 years now.
Yeah.
I started hands-on, so data analyst, data scientist, as we were called different things in those days.
Yeah.
And just basically kind of worked up through the ranks, both in financial services and in energy sectors, as well as consultancy. I feel like I've probably gone through the different waves of data. Started with the data warehousing type wave. We've gone through the kind of data science one, the data lake phase, computer vision phase, and I think we're now in the generative AI phase.
Yeah.
So that I think I've got some really interesting experiences to take from that. But my current role is the director of AI and data at ICAS, which obviously is the Institute of Chartered Accountants in Scotland. So we educate future accountants. We support our members. We regulate some firms, and we think about what the professional good is for accountancy as well. And my role there is effectively to enhance and transform kind of our experiences from all those audiences and groups that I mentioned. And some of my role is this external role as well, to really help people try and understand where AI is going in accountancy, and hopefully to try and cut through some of the hype that exists at the moment.
Excellent. Yeah, thanks. A lot of experience.
Yeah,
as you say, from the sort of the starting point through to now, it's a huge evolution, isn't it?
It really is. Yeah, it really is. And I as someone who never started off in data, I've started off in pharmacology, but then I was more interested in the analytics and the measurement and things. I'd always thought to myself, right, when's this going to end? But I think it just keeps on going, and as a kind of technological development, and thinking about those outcomes, and I think. I saw some really interesting stats recently, and Jaci have seen them as well. The tech really covers about 20-30% of the problem we're trying to solve, but the main problem is about people.
Right.
It's how do you get people thinking about, how do you get people to adopt these safely, ethically? How do you always think about the outcomes? It's too easy, in my world particularly, if the technology and data, it's too easy to get caught up in the tech. It's fascinating and it's great, but actually what's the outcomes and experiences the tech is trying to drive? And also it's too easy to get caught in, ultimately we're a world of supply and demand, and a lot of those people that do the supply are trying to think of the future. They're always trying to think of what's next. But what can you do with what you've got today?
Yeah.
And try to think about those experiences. So I think that's a learning from 30 years, and it never goes away in terms of, doesn't matter what the tech is, what you think, what you're trying to do, what's the experiences you're trying to create, what's the outcomes you're trying to create.
Yeah, yeah. And Jaci, I think you're a perfect example of how skills have evolved over that time, sort of running in parallel with the technology evolving, as Sean says. Would you mind giving a bit of insight into your background, please?
Yeah, sure. So, like I say, we've known each other for quite a while now. So I started off before my professional career, I actually had a small business making handbags in South Africa by hand. But after moving to the UK and I studied here, I started my professional career at PwC in their assurance practice. So, did external audit. I did some risk assurance as well at that stage. And then eventually moved into the business recovery services business, dealing with insolvencies and administrations and those kind of things. Really, really fascinating work. Some of the most interesting, exciting work I've ever done. There was a trading administration we once did, and I'll never forget arriving at this big plant, and the site manager just handed me a big bundle of keys and said, "These are the keys to the bulldozers. Good luck." And off he went. So I thought, "Oh wow, this is amazing." But during that kind of time with PwC, did my chartered accountancy qualification with ICAS, and then after spending the time in practice, I then moved into industry and joined NatWest initially, and that's kind of how I first met yourself. Firstly, working in the retail banking finance team from a kind of a group reporting perspective. I did that for a couple of years, but then I think one thing I've always been curious about is kind of process, and what I mean by that is the better people understand their process and how things work, the more efficient you can be, the easier life is. And to be honest, the more creative you can start to become as well. So when my son turned 1, my wife had to go back to work. She's a doctor, and she had to go to A&E, work in A&E for 3 months, which meant that with a 1-year-old, it's not really ideal because she's doing night shifts and weekends and all that kind of stuff. So I actually took a 3-month career break. And in that time, I did a correspondence course on fintech, data and technology. I suppose that just kind of opened my eyes even more to the kind of the world of possibilities in that space. So when I returned back to work at NatWest, I actually transitioned the kind of work I was doing out of kind of pure financial reporting, consolidation, all that kind of stuff, and moved into a data and technology team in the finance function at NatWest, called Performance Insights. And from there, I initially started working as a requirements translator, you could probably almost call it. So, the business requirements are the following, but when you translate that into kind of a data, software engineering, data engineering, kind of data science lens, it means something, or you describe it in a kind of completely different way. And if the data scientists and the engineers had a problem, I was able to explain that in a way that the business could understand. So that's kind of how I started off on that kind of data technology journey, and that over time built where I eventually started leading a software engineering team itself, and then also some data scientists and then some data engineers. But then, several years ago, with the kind of the boom of ChatGPT and kind of all the kind of knock-on effect that had in kind of our daily lives, I started becoming quite involved early on in NatWest's kind of group-wide AI program, looking at kind of use cases, implementation, all that kind of thing, and using the kind of the combination of my experiences over the last several years. So, kind of business understanding from my chartered accountancy days, how people kind of function and operate from a process perspective, and then the kind of software engineering, and data science perspective, try to kind of bring that all together and essentially proposed, designed, and then implemented NatWest's internal generative AI platform where people can safely and responsibly use or get access to multiple different Gen AI models, and actually also deploy use cases at scale while still having them governed and all of that. So it's been quite an interesting kind of meandering route in some respects, but it's opened up a lot of possibilities and kind of opened my eyes to, I think, some things which we think are complicated, but once you actually strip it back, it's often the same thing that's underneath. And I think, Sean, to your point, it often comes back to people, you know, how they work, how they think, and kind of what, you know, people innately try find the path of least resistance in many respects.
Yeah.
And that's got multiple different consequences, be it I will keep doing what I've always done because this is comfortable, or you know, trying to work more efficiently with, well, also the potentially there's maybe slightly going off piece, but the tendency to also not wanting to change because you either want to do something you're familiar with or something that you have more control over as well.
Yeah.
But I think all of these kinds of things and some of the issues that you've probably also seen in the past, the introduction of generative AI into our landscape, more than anything else, I feel it's actually put a massive spotlight on pre-existing issues, as opposed to highlighting necessarily new problems. There are some new ones, but they tend to be manifested through things that we've not fixed in the past. So I want to put in a generative AI system over something. It's very difficult. It keeps giving me bad results. Usually it's because you've got poor processes, you've got, you know, insufficient data that's not, you know, correct for what you need.
Yeah.
Or you're trying to do something you probably shouldn't be doing in the first place anyway. So it's interesting. It's kind of brought all these things to the forefront. And for me, kind of looping all the way back to the start of my kind of journey, the big thing I always kind of come back to is it's about appropriate, controlled and efficient process. If you have that, to be honest, no matter what the thing is you're doing, you could go a long way if you have that kind of sorted. Yeah, so that's me.
So thinking about that point in particular, the controls and the process, for any CEO or CFO partner, etc., that is just looking to begin a journey of sort of identifying use cases and sort of implementation and rollout, you've given a couple of indicators there, but I guess in terms of both of you, where would you suggest they started? You know, sort of ground zero. What should they look at first?
I mean, so we look at our member base. So there's lots of different variants and nuances in our member base. So we've got people like Jaci who work in industry.
Yeah.
We've got people that work in kind of big firms and do audit advisory services. We've got people that work in kind of smaller firms, obviously doing the kind of more usual accountancy tasks that we recognise, like tax and planning and reporting and things like that. And then we've got our new people, getting educated and things like that. So I think there's I think it's important to think about their different what they're looking for and associated with that. So it varies across those different groups. And I think you can come at to different ways. Jaci's mentioned that different things. I mean, we're going to get this osmosis that comes in anyway, because obviously we're all using it in our personal lives, and everyone's like, right, I need Copilot or ChatGPT to play with and see with that. So I think you're going to get that coming into day-to-day work anyway, and everyone's going to be using that to do some research, to do some analysis of things, and then to produce things. So that's there, and obviously there's certain controls and stuff that comes with that as part of your everyday policies that go with that as well. And then I think there's the next layer up, which is like the bigger problems to solve. And as Jaci said, some of them are you can be different for, if you're doing audit, for example. So how do you take all these, files, these billions of data points you've got and try and accelerate that process to look at something like that? Or you've got someone sitting in a smaller business that just goes, right, I'm overwhelmed with, communications, I'm overwhelmed with these documents. How do you accelerate, the analysis of, year-end results, for example, and returns? So I think you can move up to then actually what are the bigger problems I'm trying to solve in my business. And a lot of that comes back to people efficiency to start with. How can I do things a bit faster, a bit more efficient, and that maybe gives me more time to think, what's the human elements I can bring to that, the more complex things I can do, the more judgmental things that I can do as well. So that's my experience through lots of different, obviously accountancy, but other sectors as well. You tend to go with people efficiency first. So it's how do we make things a bit more efficiency, and then I think you then start looking at the bigger processes that you've got there, whether, as I say, an audit or things like that. So I think that's my experience of how I see you can apply AI at the moment, and how kind of the examples we're seeing as well. But I'm sure you'll have a build on that.
No, definitely. But I suppose the angle I'd probably maybe take it from when it comes to senior leaders or actually just the individual. For me, one thing I think I've noticed is there's obviously the, almost kind of FOMO pressure of we have to do something. Everyone is talking about this, and if we don't do something, we're going to be left behind. Which, in some respects, is there is some truth to that. But given that the whole kind of AI kind of hype has been around now for a couple of years, and some people view that the hype cycle is going down, but to be honest, if anything, I can't see it going away. Put it that way. It might evolve and morph and change, but when it comes to especially kind of people in senior positions, one thing I would often encourage them to do is to make sure that you are informed as well. It's not to say that you need to be, data science level expert, but it's about fluency, just basic fluency, understanding what these things are and are not, and also how you can, kind of work with them. Now, there are kind of loads and loads of really good resources on it. To be honest, it's probably too much, so people kind of probably get overwhelmed. If you are looking for a place to start, on the ICAS website, there's actually a couple of curated courses and things that we direct people to. One of my favorite ones is called AI Fluency, which Anthropic provide. And they actually give this really lovely framework. It's the 4Ds framework that kind of helps walk you through an understanding of not just what these things are, but how you should consider approaching them when you use them. So I'm just trying to remember what the 4Ds are.
Put you on the spot there.
Yeah, so you've got delegate. So the first one is delegate, which is essentially having a good understanding of, and in delegation, if you think about working with a colleague as well, in order to delegate something, you need to have an understanding of what the task is that needs to be done. And as part of delegation, you should have a view of what's the expected outcome as well. So before you use these things as personal assistants, you should have, that good understanding. What is the process? What am I trying to do? And at that point, you would then look at delegating it. And that's before you even interact with anything like this. The next bit then is description. So description is what most people call prompting or prompt engineering, which is a phrase I actually really don't like, to be honest. It's just explain something really well, really. So that's a skill that, we've all needed and we've probably all been quite poor at. Ironically, actually, I sometimes wonder, because often I get an email and I can see this email's definitely been written by something. And I often think, I wish they just sent me the prompt they put in, because that probably will be clearer of what's the intention of what they want to do. But I digress. So, so description is all about appropriately describing in a way that is efficient and clear of what you want it to do. And that would kind of include kind of the boundaries of what you wanted to do, how it should respond, all of that kind of stuff. After a description, it's then discernment, which is all about essentially the review. So I have understood what I need to do. I've described it. Now I've received something back. And discernment is then, because you shouldn't just accept these things in kind of blind faith. That looks brilliant, that must be true. I think fantastic examples where that's gone catastrophically wrong in industry is there have been a couple of very public cases in the press about consultancies that have written reports that they've then charged clients millions for, thousands of millions, sometimes tens of millions. But when people have actually really looked at these reports, there are huge sections that are just completely fabricated, references that don't exist. And essentially those are examples of where these AI models have hallucinated and no one's actually bothered to go in and check. So that concept of, discernment, review, challenge, that is still very, very important. And I think as a kind of a framework, if you... so if I think about like an audit practice as an example, when you do an audit, there will be existing checks and controls and balances that you'd have in the process. Not just because you've got this whiz-bang thing that can do something really quickly, you shouldn't not have the controls you've had before. You might have to change the way those controls work, but you still really need them. But I'm sure we'll probably just discuss things like that in a bit. Then the final D in that 4D framework. Oh, and actually, the one thing I would say is when you've done the discernment, if you identify things that need changing, it's about then being able to loop back to the previous step. So you might identify, actually, do you know what? The task I want to do is actually different, or I need to delegate this differently, describe it differently, and you do that kind of feedback loop iteratively. And then the final bit is diligence. I don't think I've said diligence yet.
No.
It's another D. Diligence. It is diligence. And diligence is all actually about governance. So it's about understanding, should I be doing this? And if I'm doing it, what are the things I need to be careful of? So it's and that takes many guises, many forms. So that's everything from, from a kind of a bias perspective.
Yeah.
So an example I kind of often think of is we forget that these models are trained on huge, vast amounts of data, obviously. Now, our spheres of world tend to be kind of English and at its base, speaking English now. But what I've found is if you actually change the language you speak, because the training data is a different language, it often then has different cultural biases in that can actually have a massive impact as well in how these things respond. So, there is underlying bias. So how do you check for that bias? How do you make sure that there's appropriate controls and checks that it's not veering off the task it was supposed to do? That kind of thinking, that kind of mindset as well. But then also, using these things have a cost and an impact. So that could be financial cost, but that is also environmental cost as well that you need to be aware of as well. So there's a lot kind of jam packed into there. But I think having that fluency and understanding of what these things are for any senior leader, I think is an important starting point, because I think too often, people at senior levels are holding conversations about these things. And again, not that they have to be expert, but there are assumptions often pushed by or embedded by vendors who are, at the end of the day, they're selling products.
Okay.
So they will sell you a view of what these things are. So a big phrase being thrown out at the moment is, this is an agent, it's agentic, all these things. But even that phrase is incredibly loaded. And there are huge misconceptions about what that is, and again, what that isn't as well.
Yeah.
So probably rambled on there for quite a bit.
No, I think it's brilliant. Yeah. And I think, as you say, you've described, obviously, how the leaders get up to speed in things, and they also think about the framework. So I think that's really good. And I think my perspective we chatted about before is, and Jaci's mentioned this, that you've got lots of things in place already. So this isn't about, we need to start from scratch.
Yeah.
You will have processes in place, you will have policy frameworks, you will have, academies, training, those types of things in place. And you will have approaches about how do you create ideas, how do you take them to fruition. Most companies are, already supporting with products and services.
Yeah.
So I think that's my learning from some of this as well around, think about what Jaci said, think about education, think about where you're going, think about the framework, but also think about what's the things you've already got in place and how do you repurpose those things or just kind of focus on those things. You've got data protection policies, data management policies already in place, and that's in some ways some of the higher risk, apart from the examples that Jaci's mentioned about some of the public places there. The higher risk places are still around data management. You've got a PII data risk, for example, or sensitive data risk, those types of things. So I think that's the other thing to do as well, is think about what Jaci's saying, but also think about how can I reuse what already exists.
Yeah. No, I think just to absolutely massively stress that, if you are doing something in your business, on your kind of process, that you identify a new risk or new issue, it's probably because you don't have an existing one. Never mind the AI bit of it. Yeah. So if you don't have a clear, understood, publicized within your organization view of what are the policies and controls of your organization, that you need to fix that first before you even touch anything with kind of in the AI space, to be honest.
Yeah, and a really practical thing that I'm noticing as well, and certainly some of the the influencers out there, the kind of, the accountants that are kind of specializing in AI, they're talking about is, do you have an AI policy? For example, and again, the different personas, as we call them in ICAS, that have talked about, NatWest, well, we'll obviously have one. But maybe some of the smaller firms are thinking, right, I've just got a data protection policy in place. So, what do I think about, and that's one of the things, like the opposite I just said, that's maybe a new thing for you, just about, how do you manage these, the use of AI, for example, and some of those risks that are not identified in some of the other things. So that's a really practical thing I talk to our members about, is about, do you have an AI policy in place? And again, one, they're available, and you can use AI to generate a policy quite quickly and get it validated. So that's definitely something that's maybe a wee bit missing, I'm seeing. So,
and to use that as an example, the first D being delegate, where would you naturally see the delegation of the creation of the policy sitting? I understand it will vary from business to business, from team to team, etc. But if it's underpinned by sort of data, process, people, and technology, generally, where do you see the policy being formed?
I'm going to ask you, who owns your AI policy?
Yeah, so that's a great, that's a good question. So they're actually driving in this morning. So if you are looking for any kind of guidance on policies, governance, how to set up these things, is a really brilliant book that's recently been published by one of my colleagues called Dr. Paul Donga. It's called Governing the Machine.
Okay.
And that specifically looks at AI governance guardrails, how to run a program. Now at NatWest, our AI, so we've got a couple of things, but we do have a AI policy that's kind of principles based, and then it's got kind of the underlying components of it. And that's owned by actually Paul Donga at the moment. He kind of oversees it. So he's the head of AI strategy and ethics. But we have I suppose there's two things here. The first thing is we have, and you do need, like Sean was saying, an AI policy that kind of helps steer the ship of how you operate. And you do need to take that. Well, there are a couple of things you need to take into consideration there, including what's the local legislation that you have to conform to when it comes to kind of AI. So depending where people are based, that can vary and that can change. So being in the UK and kind of working quite closely with the EU, the kind of the big behemoth that we all are paying quite close attention to is the EU AI Act.
Okay.
In the US, the kind of slight nuances and variances and changes on that, but it's about being aware of those things. Now, again, in the kind of the NatWest kind of context, a big component that we were doing, for several years now, even before the kind of old ChatGPT, but when it comes to AI specifically, was considering, what is the legislation that is coming down and what's likely to come down, but then also what are the things that are likely to impact the way we work. But then having that AI policy, but then also looking at other existing policies, because in the same kind of, I think is what you were kind of hinting to as well, Sean, is it's good to have an AI policy, but that shouldn't be in isolation or siloed from other existing policies as well. Now, my view, and something I often share with people, is you're far better embedding or enhancing pre-existing policies as well. Yeah. So when it comes to data protection, privacy, all those things, they should be already of such a structure that they can deal with these kind of changes.
Interesting.
If they are not, then make the changes as well. But also don't forget that when it comes to policies, I think one thing that often happens is you have, I think the term is policy as written and then policy as put into practice. So look, I've got a policy. Oh, this is amazing. Tick, done. But then the way people actually apply that can be different. And I think it's about making sure that a policy document is a living thing. Yeah. It does need to evolve and change over time. In some respects, it's kind of more not that it's guidance. It should be kind of firm and clear of, what you shouldn't do, and if there's ambiguity, where you need to go. But it's about kind of making sure that those things are appropriate for what you're doing. And I think that's kind of all good corporate governance. That those are not new things. Yes. But the kind of the implementation of kind of generative AI especially has really brought that into to focus. So it's even things like GDPR. When that, ChatGPT first came out, the risk for organizations of data loss and inappropriate sharing of personal data, or how you handle GDPR related information, was, in my opinion, a huge risk. So, people probably had to move quite quickly to make sure that they didn't put themselves into any issues. Because just although it's a new technology, it doesn't mean you can just ignore the things you needed to do before as well.
Yeah. You mentioned guardrails there, just when you were alluding to the, the implementation of a policy. With it seems a common topic that's been discussed a lot, I guess, and that seems to be the fallback safety net that people talk about, as in we're using AI, it has guardrails, we have a policy, but actually the controls and the sort of security around that, the checking of the guardrails, I guess, particularly in sort of technology audit, for example, being extremely prevalent. Generally, what advice would you give just around setting guardrails, and once guardrails are in place, the sort of the maintenance and management?
So I don't know if you want to go. I think we should probably start with what the definition of, in this context, guardrails, because again, guardrails is quite a loaded word. So in the kind of data science space, I'll probably say more than anything else, the term guardrails often refers to what is the safety net for the end user put around how the system works. Just to check, Sean, do you agree with that?
I do. Yeah.
So I think in the context of probably a lot of what Sean and I will say, it's in the context of that.
Okay, that's helpful. Thanks.
Most likely. But I don't know, Sean, I don't want to steal all the thunder.
No, at all. No. So I like the model where we think of I like the cybersecurity model where they think about people, they think about tech, they think about the data.
Yeah.
So they try and split it up a bit because, as Jaci said, guardrails mean a lot of things.
Yeah.
So actually, as Jaci mentioned, you've got your end user there as well. So effectively, what different controls, effectively monitoring do you need for each of those particular components? So that's if I'm having that conversation with guardrails and some of the things that we talk about with our members as well, it's trying to get in a bit more of the detail around what do you actually mean by those things. And the more obvious stuff is the technology. So you can put in preventive controls and detective controls around tech, for example, and also data. So that's a fairly mature area on those types of things. And then, as you see, you get around to the kind of people aspects of it. And then a lot of that comes back to policy, and then how do you actually put the policy into place around processes, for example. So how do people follow processes? Roles, for example, is the role quite clear in terms, and also have you adapted that for AI, for example? What's the basic level of skills and training needed for that role, for example? And do you have those to fulfill that role? And obviously then as individuals as well, are you fulfilling your role? Are you working to the policy? So how do you measure at an individual level? So that's again, frameworks. We like frameworks. That's kind of it's a more detailed way of getting into that. Try to unpack that one phrase effectively. So
because I think for me, especially when it comes to the usage of use cases, and I think that's the thing that people over the last couple of years have been fixated on. It's like, how many use cases do you have? What's your proof of concept? But then when you start actually moving something from a proof of concept to actually using it in anger, especially generative, I suppose not just generative AI models, but also kind of more traditional, if you want to call it, AI kind of use cases. In that context, for myself, when I think about the guardrails, I would view it. So if you use the analogy of driving a car, okay, so the guardrails from my perspective would be the seatbelt that you wear. So most of the vendors and providers that kind of give these tools, they often have embedded guardrails that they often provide. So for example, if you go on a lot of these public generative AI assistants, be it Claude or Gemini or ChatGPT or whatever, if you start to ask it to do things or if you, like it's very, very rare that I come across anyone that ChatGPT has sworn at them, as an example.
Yeah.
Now, that is a toxicity kind of guardrail that's been put on that interaction. But also, if you ask it to do certain things, it will then also say, I'm not going to do that, or block it, because again, that's a kind of harmful content, harmful interaction type thing as well. So that's kind of more a filter effectively that's applied to keep the system, but also the user safe. One thing that I suppose, so technicians are probably more familiar to this, but there are also guardrails against what's referred to as jailbreaking, which is where you can force a system to do something that it wasn't designed to do, or prompt in a way that essentially could extract sensitive information. So kind of in the very early days of a lot of this, the kind of production systems being deployed, people were able to essentially, write in English and then insert code, or like be it Python or JSON or something that gave a command line to then make their internal system then do something or respond in a way to kind of extract things, surreptitiously to do with that. So the guardrails are there. Seatbelt kind of keep you safe, but there's a very easy fixation, in my opinion, at the moment on guardrails themselves only in isolation, because when you come to implement these systems, it's the one thing that a lot of people have heard the phrase, or they're provided by vendors.
Yeah.
But when you drive a car, you don't just have a seatbelt, you actually have to drive the car itself. And you have to make sure that car is doing what it should be doing as well. So it's being steered in the right direction. You can see if it needs fuel, it needs oil, what speed it's going. You've got a sat nav maybe as well that kind of tells you you're going in the right direction. So in the car context, in the AI context, in my view, that will be what was referred to as evaluation.
Okay.
So in the same way that all the kind of indicators and things in a car tell you that it's doing what it should be doing, model evaluation is incredibly important. I cannot stress enough how important it is, and actually it will probably become one of the biggest things going forward. There are whole industries that are being born out of model evaluation and persistent evaluation, because it is very hard. And I think that's the thing that people probably don't want to talk about as much, especially vendors selling these products, because when you use these systems in isolation, they seem very plausible. So again, that example of that report that someone published with kind of spurious content in there, these things sound very intelligent, they sound very correct, because they are probabilistic in the sense of they have calculated the probability of this being the content you want. Now, once you scale a process, so if you, for example, I'm thinking in the finance industry, if you, I don't know, have some form of reconciliation that you need to do.
Yeah.
And you've got, as today you would have a team of people reviewing line by line, does this kind of thing is the reconciliation correct, and writing justifications. If you then decide, actually, I'm going to get, an automated system that can apply a criteria that traditionally a human would have to do, but you give a large language model or Gen AI system the criteria to assess every single reconciliation, and for it to give me an indicator of, thumbs up or thumbs down, essentially. When you scale that to, hundreds, thousands, millions of things, how can you be comfortable of the overall level of accuracy? Because when you do a one-on-one interaction, and often people would say, oh no, but humans aren't accurate as well, and they can make mistakes, which I totally get it.
Yeah.
But a human can't do 1 million line reviews in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
No human can do that.
Yeah.
But these systems are tending towards being able to do that. So for the human doing one at a time, you have the ability to quickly identify if there is a problem. When you scale these things, you don't have that. So you need a way of evaluating that at scale or consistently it is doing what it should be doing over time as well. And it's also not just a one-time thing. It's not just I get in the car, I've got enough fuel, off I go.
Yeah.
I get in the car and I can see what's happening to the fuel. I can understand where I'm going as well. So that component is very important. But overarching over all of that, back to the car analogy, is, when you drive a car, because I can drive a car and I've got my seatbelt on, it doesn't mean I can decide I can drive on the left or the right if I want today, or I can go as fast as I want, or there are still rules of the road. So the highway code, which in my view, in that analogy, would be what is your AI governance? What are the kind of overall control frameworks that you have as well? Because if anything, that's the thing that avoids accidents from happening. You need a license to drive a car. You need an MOT. If you don't have a license, don't have an MOT, then you don't get in that car.
Yeah.
Never mind having a car in the first place. And I think that's something that a lot of people who are now interacting with these systems in a kind of a business sense to deploy, it's a new world to them that they're not familiar with, because these technologies it can feel very quick to develop. So I've done a thing and oh my goodness, look, this is going to save me, and I just don't want to scale this. I want to go from like optimized to scale like overnight. But and I think this is, if there's an area of tension I'm seeing at the moment, is kind of from a business perspective, people have huge need, but they're moving more into a world of having the capability to feel like they're doing a lot. So I actually recently had someone come up to me and they said, I've been using an external kind of app, and I've managed to build a full what could be production application. Here's the code, go and deploy it for me. Which is like, this is amazing that you can do this, but the tension then comes in where you have the other traditional technology disciplines where there's a sequence of, you have the development, you do your dev cycle, your user acceptance testing, your testing, your governance, your manage change request, production deployments, authentication, all of that kind of good stuff, which is not a world that the business is initially used to. And I think it's just being conscious that although you can move fast, it doesn't mean you can just break everything around you as well.
And given the prevalence and evaluation, I would assume the audit discipline aligns quite well to that in terms of the mindset and the method that would be required to fulfil that. Would you envisage that being emerging subject matter that ICAS would sort of seek to evolve, Sean, just in relation to how technology audit and I guess process audit, etc., might be done?
I mean, I think it's Jaci will know this as well. I think that, as you say, where there are significant processes, where there's significant analysis required, those areas are going to have a lot of innovation, and when you can move quicker for audit, for example, and reduce some of the costs associated with it. So I think that's definitely areas of innovation, working that through. I think the interesting thing is again, there's some nice frameworks out there. The areas where we're seeing a lot of movement, for example, are those areas that are where you're able to codify things. So obviously you're able to turn that process into something that you can apply software and codes to it. And then also levels of complexity as well. The more complex areas, the more judgmental areas, the more human areas, that a bit harder to go after. So actually, where's the lower complexity areas to go after? So I think, as you say, there are parts of the audit process that you can definitely, if you want to research, benchmark, do data analysis, for example, there are areas potentially that you can accelerate. But actually, just that human level of, right, I need to actually review all the sources, do the sniff test on that, for example, those types of things. They're areas that obviously still need to have that associated with else.
Yeah, and you made a reference a minute ago, Jaci, just in relation to whether or not it's leadership led or sort of the role holder led. And in my experience of recruitment, the adoption of AI, but a lot of tools generally would seem to have been individually led. So somebody has taken initiative and proactivity to bring it into their role and remit, as opposed to it being part of a criteria for a job or for a role, if you see what I mean by that. And so somebody has initiative, as you say, the colleague that came up to you with the full blown application. you've got sort of the policy and the use case, and you've got that bit in the middle where somebody's sort of trying to sort of act upon both. To use the reconciliation example that you gave, somebody that's in a job that's sort of determined a way of being able to improve this reconciliation process through the utilisation of AI. From what I understood, the ability for that to succeed should be based, broadly speaking, on a combination of the AI policy and the data governance policy. Yet, if it wasn't, is it the policy that needs amended, or actually the ability to fulfil the use case that would be amended in that instance?
Yeah, so I think this is a great one, because so if you kind of almost strip that example back to just kind of bare bones, so I would say the reconciliation being the example, you'd probably start off by understanding what is the kind of the pain point, what's the actual outcome you need, and what are the pain points that exist. The kind of internal joke I had was I kind of myself ran this thing called the Project Trojan Horse, which was, people would be like, oh, that he's the AI guy. So I'd be like, yeah, I'm your AI guy. I'll help you with whatever you want. But then often when I look at use cases, I actually start off with that question of, well, what's the outcome? What's the pain point? And what's the actual solution? Forget about not even thinking about kind of AI to start with, because often you would find, and I think I just want to make this clear from the start, there are many, 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 many things that do not need generative AI. Just because I've got a hammer doesn't mean everything's a nail. Just because I've got a sledgehammer that looks like a hammer doesn't mean that it should be used to tap in a nail in the wall, as an example. So use the right thing for the right job. I'd say it's an absolute key thing. But in an example like that, so there are a couple of things that you need in place in order for that to kind of have success. So clearly, understanding of the process, but then also an understanding of what are the tools and things that are available to you that are approved and appropriate in your situation, so in your workplace. Now, that in of itself does put an onus on the broader organization to make sure that they actually have tools available that people can use. So, I'd always encourage people, if you're working in an organization, make sure that you use the tools that are approved by your organization. You might find something externally that you think, this is brilliant, this can do what I want, but there's a whole bunch of complexity and additional problems that come in by having too much fragmentation of the tool set that you have available, because often there is a lot of overlap. So if you're trying to find a solution, speak to the people in your organization that know more than you might do about what the tooling is available, and seek that advice. Now, again, in order to do that, if you have good governance and good process, you should have some form of design authority or approvals forum for solution implementation.
Right.
If I'm saying these words and you think I don't know what that is, you need to do something about that, because that would influence and kind of affect your operational model of how you operate. If you don't have something like that, what you tend to see happen is huge fragmentation, duplication, overlap of processes. So again, that's essentially policy governance part of it. Now, once you have the tool, and be it kind of Gen AI or otherwise, you do need the kind of organizational policy and framework of what you should or shouldn't be doing with that as well. And when you implement it, I use this as an individual and I run on my machine, but if I walk away, then it's not going to cause a big problem, or is there something that is part of an operationalized process? And the reason that's really important is I'll never I've got these nightmares of my early career where I thought, I remember this one example where we had some process and I thought, I'll be smart and I'll put in like some fancy Power Query process that kind of saved, we took it from like 5 hours of work to 5 minutes, and we're like, big success, isn't this amazing? But it meant I could never go on holiday, or whenever I was on holiday, I'd always have to take my laptop because I was the only one who knew how to run the process.
Right.
And it's essentially, you need to avoid that from happening. So yes, but then again, part of that's kind of operational, process governance, op model pieces. But overarching over all of this, you do need, again, in the car example, your highway code. What is the policies and kind of guidance that you give to employees? And that could be from a, depending on the size of your organization, that could be global, or it could be functional. As in a finance function, a finance department. What are your policies? And I think especially in finance functions, considering that especially people work in organizations that are listed or have need to do external disclosures, often your data classification becomes very important. So you need to have a view of these tools, they can be used for public available information, these can be used for internal confidential, but these ones can be used for secret, or if anything is secret, do not touch it with a barge pole, because from a data governance perspective, it's going to cause us, issues and problems as well.
Yeah, complex.
I'm just aware that obviously I can imagine someone sitting there in a firm of 10, 20 people are going,
which is true,
wow, this is what the hell, this is overwhelming for us. And I think I come back to the personas, but I think it's, obviously the scale of this is dependent on what you're doing on a day-by-day basis. But if you're sitting in a firm of 10, 20 people, it's the simple stuff I think that we've mentioned around, do you have that guiding document, that policy, for example, that you can work to, the tools that you will be using, whether they come within the tools that you normally use, your QuickBooks, Sage, or whatever else you're using, or Copilot or Microsoft, you'll go, oh, I can use these tools. But as Jaci's mentioned, like, it's thinking about what guardrails do I need to know, well, one step away from the technology and think, right, here's the processes I need to, work through, right? One, how can I improve those processes? What can I use? Okay, I've got these tools, but really kind of understand the tools and how they're working and how your client data is effectively being used. I think that's a key thing to work through on that. Help yourself or your colleagues work through what is the appropriate use of these tools. What are checks you need to put in place to really understand that. Make sure there's that's generally I think before we get into the agent world, there's still humans needed in that process. You still need to check what's going in. You still need to check what's coming out. You need to work with your colleagues, do peer reviews, those types of things. Make sure, the sniff test, make sure it all works. So I think that's it. All this, what we were talking about, can be distilled down into something much simpler, I think, for a smaller business as well. So.
And thinking about the smaller business, would a process audit, a sort of a data integrity, data quality type process, would that be a precursor to them sort of identifying what they might want to use AI for?
I think it's even simpler than that. I think it's, where's your, as Jaci said, what's your pain points?
Yeah, okay.
Are you spending nights and weekends, processing data, or, going through documents, for example? Could I make it a bit simpler? Do I have a, month end or quarter end? Actually, my stack's like this, and I never enough time to do it. So how can you make that a lot simpler? So I think it's thinking about where your pain points are, and then going, right, okay, what's the appropriate tools and things that I can use to get through that. So I think it's even thinking about simpler, and like anything, the quality of the information, the documents, the data that you're working with, is dependent on obviously what outcomes you're actually trying to work through that. So I think part of that process could be actually how can I improve the quality of data I'm getting, and how can I make data collection a lot easier, for example. How can I make it easier for my clients to submit documents and data, for example, and work that through as well. So there's not many parts of the processes that can't be improved by what we're looking at here. So.
And if in doubt, keep as much human involvement for as long as possible until.
So, and it's a maturity. I mean, you've got a different scale but we've even seen that in ICAS, and we're seeing that with our members as well. It's about being experiment and be methodical, but just take your time. Just work it through. Understand where the improvements can be. Let it dual run for a while, even with your current processes, for example. And just get really used to the technology. Understand the limitations of where it's at. Understand where it works well, where it doesn't work well. get your people up to speed on how to prompt, how to set the instructions, for example. The technology is moving so quickly as well. It's almost staying on top of it every week for something new that's coming out. So I think it's that's what we're seeing. That's what we're helping our members with, was around just, experiment, stay methodical though, and get used to the technology.
And for those that would potentially fear some of the negative sort of connotations, Jaci, you referred to the example of the report that had the fictitious content. When I think about the finance skill set, and I guess audit as a practice, and the CA content, things like professional judgment, accountability at the forefront of that. You mentioned ethics too, Jaci. So in terms of the professional judgment aspect that would still be required to be the overlay, if you like, to any AI output, where would you suggest that somebody focused on as it related to the output of the AI work?
Yeah, so I think the opening salvo I'd probably say on this is professional judgment and professional expertise, or people's expertise, I would say, are more important than ever, and they're going to become even more important. A big mistake, in my opinion, that a lot of people make is they have this assumption, or it's maybe unconscious assumption that they put in around agency. And what I mean with that is who is actually accountable and responsible for the output or outcome of something.
Yeah.
So I've used, generative AI to make a report. If it's wrong, it's the AI's fault.
Yeah.
So the agency, they feel they can, agency can move away. Now, if you think of a slightly different profession, so the medical profession as an example, if a clinician does something that leads to someone's death, so we do it's like the far end of the extreme end of the scale.
Yeah.
I can promise you now, no one's going to buy for a second if they say, "Oh no, but this AI model told me to do it. And it's its fault. It's not mine."
Yeah.
The responsibility, the agency, still sits with them as the clinician as well, and that applies just as much for anyone using these tools as well. So it is a tool. It's not a human. I know it is intelligence in artificial intelligence, but these things are not intelligent in the way that we are. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. They are probabilistic. They are probability engines. They've calculated the probability of something. Just because something could even be 80% probably correct, there is still that margin for error as well. It's not 100%. Again, not that humans get it right all the time, but we're different.
Yeah.
in that respect. Now, for when people are kind of looking at skills of the future and kind of where they want to go when it comes to kind of this professional judgment aspect of it, I feel that there are probably two views of the future world that people envisage. The one is, I have a company and there's one button that says run and I press it and off it goes. Or the other part of the kind of way that the world could go, which is aspirationally where I think we should try to go to, is a world where we can have more depth in our expertise. So, and actually, so if I try to just kind of bring a bit more life to that. So since the advent of personalized computing, there are a lot of, so before personalized computing, people they'd be specialists in a job. So I do this job. If I've got something that is outside of the remit of my job, I would give it to someone else. So that was then the advent of, the typing pool, assistants, those kind of things. So I'm not going to write this report, the typist will do that. So there you go. I need to travel somewhere, or, the assistants, they will book my travel, all that kind of stuff. Now, with the advent of personalized computing especially, and word processing and all those things, a lot of those jobs essentially were taken out of those kind of generalized assistive groups, and the individual was then expected to do that. So you have to plan your own calendar, you have to book your travel. But it means that if you look at your whole day, the amount of time that you actually get to spend on your expertise has been completely compressed, because there's all of this other stuff that you need to do. Now, I hope that we get to a space where the the kind of the admin driven tasks that would have been outsourced previously, that's where these technologies can really step in. And I think it's with kind of a massive, I appreciate someone listening to this might think, geez, like you two are kind of AI people, but you're doom and gloom. That is not the case. I think there's a huge potential and benefit here, but it's how it's applied. So my view is that I think we'll hopefully see more of that. But where you can then really differentiate yourself is depth of expertise, depth of professional judgment, because the better you understand your sphere of influence, the much better the quality of the output is that you'll give as well. Because again, one thing I think people often forget is, like, back to that probabilistic thing.
Yeah.
A probability is often put on what's called a distribution curve, so a bell curve.
Yeah.
So and that kind of middle point is kind of the mean. So if you're using or relying too heavily on these assistants, it will deviate to the mean. So what you say will be pretty much the same or very close to what everyone else is saying as well. Kind of true differentiation is differentiation from the mean, which that in order to do that, that takes a good level of understanding of what your kind of what you add in, what's your kind of spark as well. Often getting a deviation from the mean is viewed quite negative, but I feel that's the thing that's going to differentiate people as well. So kind of really lean into that, because that's where you will then be able to set yourself apart, and you'll really be able to add genuine value as well in what you do. Now, on the kind of professional judgment aspect of it, and Sean will be able to add a lot more to this as well, and something we discussed beforehand, is there are things that we need to be careful of when using these tools, and again, educate yourself, be mindful of these things when you use them, because there is inherent bias in a lot of these tools as well. And if you're also using, well, either as an individual or as a kind of end-to-end process, if there are multiple steps in that process where there's been reliance or use of these tools, you can get a compounding effect as well. So even if you say, summarize this document, now, if you summarize it, or Sean summarize it, or I summarize it, we will all summarize it in a slightly different way, because there will be an area or thing that you would put emphasis on, which would influence the way that summary is made. So, and actually, this is again just slightly tangential. If there's a report that you want to read and you want to understand, please just read the report, because someone has written that report in a specific way for a specific reason to emphasize specific things. If you're just going to get some, just a summarized, because actually the way to almost think about it is, I remember being in high school and we'd have, here's your the terms reading the novel for that you need to read, and you could buy these like summaries of what the book is. Now that just having read the summary and actually reading the book are two completely different experiences, and the impact and influence that it has on you is very, very different. It's the same with these kind of reports as well. So kind of don't forget that. So, but the point I was trying to make originally is, I think from a professional judgment perspective, one thing I feel we need to be very aware of are these kind of almost like micro nudges that we would get, and they would compound over time from potentially using these things, because again they tend towards the underlying bias of the training data or the setup that they have, which we might not be aware of, but you need to be able to kind of put in your own perspective as well. So Sean, I'm sure I know you've been working with a couple of things like us as well on the professional judgment bit. So
that's right, yeah, and as you mentioned, I think it's such an important topic. So ICAS sponsored some research which we'll publish formally in a month or two, but we spoke about our conference recently, and that was actually with a medium-sized accountancy firm called Menzies, and a kind of research group from Manchester Uni Aston Business School. I'm sure I've forgotten a few others in there as well. And I think it's such an important topic that we want to sponsor this research to take a very methodical approach to it, and kind of a research academic, and how do you initiate this type of understanding how generative AI is going to affect practices and processes around that. And Jaci's touched on a few of these things. So as part, we the group, trained up, identified some use cases, trained up individuals in the firm, and then basically, monitored, how they were working with it, did some quant analysis on it, had interviews with them. So it was really kind of a really good process to really understand how that was going. And not unsurprisingly, we could probably guess some of the uses of it. They were using generative AI. So, it was a mid-sized firm. So different things like, research, benchmarking, audit, those types of things. They identified different uses of it. Sometimes it was very kind of human-led in terms of, how it was going to use. Sometimes very kind of conversational, back and forth with it. And sometimes it was AI-led as well. The individual was very much letting the AI, drive and where those things were going. But I think ultimately it was all come back to, the human should be, in that particular process.
Yeah.
They should be checking what the output is. There's the liability, accountability still sits with the human. But there was examples of what the research group called encroachment. So the encroachment was starting to creep into that professional judgment. There was too much trust in what was coming out, not enough challenge in what was coming out of that as well.
Yeah.
So I think that was some fundamental things coming out of that. But I definitely think there's a guideline and a framework that we can start, certainly as an initial view and start populating, which obviously the accountants can use, and again the membership bodies and that can embed that into their policy guidance as well. So.
Yeah, and if without speaking on Menzies' behalf, generally, how did the trial go and the output of it? From your side?
No, I think so. I suppose that if they may be classified as someone who as an organisation that's more forward thinking as well.
Good.
So they were part of this research group, so they're looking to innovate and move forward. So they're they're maybe more in that early adopter space, but they found it highly valuable in terms of where they're going to start seeing the benefits around that research analysis, the drafting, those types of things as well. But I think this definitely highlighted where they need to think about those guardrails that we spoke about, applying the frameworks to it. And very much like what's the role, what's the individual, how to make sure the training's right, how do you make sure the monitoring's right, how do you make sure the collaboration and discussions are right with it. So.
And I can imagine the encroachment part that you mentioned would become quite a common occurrence for people that are going to be using it for the first time in that type of subject matter. What would you advise would be a good approach to, I guess, evaluating the encroachment, and I guess the continual evaluation of that?
Sean, you're taking this one. I think in the kind of very that 4Ds principle actually. So when it comes to the individual, I think using a framework like that actually does help.
Okay.
Because again, the whole thing was, I'm delegating. What is it that I'm trying to do? Am I clear in the way that I'm kind of using it? And then discernment. What is this actually doing?
Yeah.
And kind of reviewing it against that kind of original bit. And again, for me, this again actually emphasizes why professional judgment is so important for the individual. So you can't, in order to identify encroachment, you need to be very kind of comfortable and confident in what it is that you know and your expertise and your skills. And not to say that you have to be a superstar, but you need to be self-aware as well of using it. And I think if the default is, here's a lot of information, what should I do? There's maybe kind of another underlying thing that actually needs to be considered first. Now, it depends from task to task, because there's also, I suppose, a perspective of what is the thing that you're trying to do. And I think so. The EU AI Act, it kind of has different categories of use cases that are, kind of very simplistic ways. If you think of kind of like green, amber, red kind of view. So, green, what can I have for breakfast today? It doesn't really matter. Like, if you get it wrong, it's not the end of the world. But there are certain gradients of things that you do that have high impact and in the red category. So, for example, doing something that influences other people.
Yeah.
You know, you need to be pretty bulletproof and kind of why you decided it. And my advice tends to be like, do not even go there in the kind of the AI space as well. You need to be very, very confident that it's going to work. So, you know, so for me, it's kind of before you've even started with whatever it is, being sure that you should be using it as well, you know, for that.
Yeah.
And when you have used it, the onus is really on you. So currently a term that people have probably heard or has been kind of banded about a lot is called human in the loop review, which that puts the onus on you as the human operator to make sure that you do that review as well.
And in an ideal world, would you always suggest that there was another human? So you're sort of reviewing the output of the AI, and there could well be somebody, a judge else on your judgment.
Yeah. So, and I think an example, again, currently this has been a very hot topic over the last year and a half, especially. A term that, again, some of the people might have heard of is vibe coding.
Okay.
There's a huge boom of that over the last couple of years, which is I can ask ChatGPT to write me a Python code on XYZ, and then poof, like magic, it looks amazing. You know, here's this bit of code. Now, in the software engineering industry, there was this kind of big concern of, we're going to get, you know, people can lose their jobs, or there's going to be really poor code. I think the point I more want to make is that poor code bit, because the experience I've had is that people who've always had very good process in, I have someone write the code, and then I have someone else who reviews my code. They give me feedback, and only once that's approved, I would then push it into production. Now, if you take like an audit as an example, I have someone who does an audit kind of task. Pre-AI days, pre-PC days, you would do the job, and then your manager or someone would review it.
Yeah.
And then you would say it's completed. That should not change.
Yeah, okay.
So even if it is, I do a thing, if it's going to go somewhere or be used for something, you need self-review. But if someone always did review that, they should still be reviewing it. That shouldn't change. Now, that person reviewing it, they might use an AI system to be like, here's the criteria, can you help me identify if I've missed anything here? Which, again, that's kind of in the framework of that's fine. But you still need someone, because, again, that manager doing the review, they are still accountable. And in audit kind of, I appreciate audits can get quite busy and time pressured and that kind of thing. But if an audit manager is just clicking through or waving through things through to kind of hit the deadlines, that is not like an AI issue. That's a kind of a human-led process issue that's different considerations. So, that, again, it should not change what existing controls you have. And if you're listening to this and thinking, we don't do that anyway, there's a different problem there as well. So, see to that first.
So over-reliance is a real risk to professional judgment in that case.
Yeah. I suppose the one thing that is slightly different in this, it's not different because this is something that's existed for years and years and years. It's a thing called automation bias. So I have something that automatically at scale can do something, and because it does it really efficiently, I have this inherent trust that it must be correct.
Yeah.
And I think that is something that we do need to be careful of, because there are certain tasks and activities that we do which previously we couldn't necessarily automate because it had a form of implied judgment or intelligence, be it via criteria. But now you can get, these systems to be, well, here's a criteria, compare it to give me an output, which is essentially implied judgment. But if you have something that does that at scale, and if it comes back and says, oh, it's all tick, 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 you're fine, you could have the automation bias of the system says it's fine, so therefore it is fine. But that's slightly different to things that we we've discussed before.
Yeah.
But again, something to be aware of.
That brings this episode to a close. Thanks very much for listening. We really hope that you enjoyed W&Ai. And if so, please feel free to like and subscribe. We have some excellent guests lined up, and we look forward to sharing more content with you. At W&A, we recruit with impact. We use our expertise to recruit accountancy and finance talent and help build finance teams across Scotland and beyond. We truly value the human aspect of our role, and building lasting relationships is at the heart of our success. For more information, please visit www.wilkinsonandassociates.co.uk. That's www.wilkinsonandassociates.co.uk. Thanks for listening.